Hello friends, welcome back to my channel. My name is Danny and it's time for a Chonky check-in. This year, one of my focuses is to get back into reading those really chunky books that I love. Last year, for whatever reason, I didn't read as many big books as I typically would, and I don't know if that was because I was trying to hit a specific number or if it was just I wasn't gravitating towards those books, but towards the end of the year, I really found a couple of larger books that I enjoyed, and it kind of reminded me that I really like a long story. And so I wanted to intentionally pick some books this year to kind of keep up that pace that I am going to be reading some larger books. I am defining chunky books by saying 500 pages is like my cutoff. So all of the books that I'm going to talk about today are 500 pages and above. Some of these books I did actually talk about in several of my previous videos. They were some of my favorite books for the month. There were a couple that were not my favorite books of the month, so I'm going to give you guys just almost a screen clipping of some of the books that I have read and talked about already with you guys, just to not repeat things on my channel. And so I'm going to overlay some pictures of the larger fantasy novels that I have loved along with their ratings, and then also some pictures of some larger fantasy novels that I did not love in their ratings. So all of those are books that I have mentioned on previous videos, and if you guys are interested in my thoughts on those books, I will link those videos down below. Onto the 4 chunky books that I have not gotten a chance to talk to you guys about yet. The first of these books is The Howling Dark, and so it's actually right here in my collection, but instead of holding it up for you guys, I'm just going to put a picture up. It's just easier for me that way. So I actually was kind of disappointed with myself. I completely forgot to put this on my highs and lows videos, even though this was a 5-star read for me. So I'm really glad that I get a chance to talk to you guys about it here. The Howling Dark is the second book in the Sun Eater series. And so last year, The Empire of Silence, which is book 1, was my top book of 2022. And so I was really excited to continue the series and read about the infamous life of Hadrian Marlowe. In this series, you follow a character named Hadrian Marlowe, who is known as both a legend and a monster. He has destroyed suns, he has completely eradicated an entire race of people, and depending on who you talk to, they either love him or they hate him. So this is a story told from Hadrian's perspective, and he is essentially an old man now, and he is describing, it's essentially him telling you how he got to this point in his life, how he came to be known as the Sun Eater. And so you follow him from when he's a teenager, living at home with his noble father, and events happen that put him on this path. And I just really love this series. This is a space opera, if I haven't said that already, so this is sci-fi. I love the journey that Hadrian goes on and how this story is told. The fact that it's told from his perspective, I think some people get frustrated because you're only ever in his head, but I personally like that. I mean, I enjoy multiple perspective stories as well, but I think it's fun to get to see his struggles and what he perceives and the relationships that he is forming with different people as you go in the books, from his point of view as a young man, but then also because of the fact that he's telling the story when he's very old, he puts in like little snips of essentially like, oh, what I didn't understand at that point in time, or he'll make fun of himself or make a comment about how he didn't know what he was up against at this point in time. He also says throughout the book, he makes fun of himself for being melodramatic. And so there's definitely that piece, and I have heard some people get kind of annoyed because of the fact that he does tend to be a little bit of a drama queen at some time or at some points in the book, but I really enjoy that aspect, and the fact that he pokes fun at himself because of it. I really enjoy that part or that aspect of his character. I also found that this series has some really interesting conversations about freedom and what it means to be free, what it means to have privilege and be free, and then that can also be from his perspective when he's looking at all of these different events that have happened in his life that have affected him, how even from a place of privilege, which he is, he still considers himself in a prison for certain things. And I'm not going to give away like any plot points, but I just found it to be a really interesting conversation as he's going through and as he's growing up, but also being put through the ringer in all of these different events in his life. It's really fun to see his character arc throughout the first book, and that continues into the second book, The Howling Dark. So The Howling Dark continues Hadrian Marlowe's story from the point of book 2, so we just continue his story arc. One of the things that I didn't like about this is there is a little bit of a time jump, and so you do spend time kind of catching up. I think that it's written really well, and I think that you eventually do figure it out. One of the things I really enjoy about this author is you kind of get dropped into this world and you are treated as if you know what's going on and you know context clues. So Hadrian will refer to really famous figures in history in their world or in their universe, I guess I should say, and you are just expected to know who that is. Now, there are context clues for like different stories, like if he's talking about a myth that happened, or it might be someone who actually exists in our world, because this world is humanity past when Mother Earth has died and we have all ventured out into the universe and live on different planets, but we still come from the world that we are in right now in this world. And so some of the stories even hint back to things that we know happened in our ancient days, and they're considered really ancient in the book. And so those little pieces are interesting, and I like the fact that you are just kind of dropped in and expected to figure it out. There is a glossary in the back, so you can look up certain things, and you can look up, there's a whole bunch of different races and a whole bunch of different worlds, and so you can look up those things as well. Another thing I really enjoyed about this second book is you get to delve into the characters from the first book a little bit further. So I think the first book does a good job of establishing the base characters that you or that Hadrian spends a lot of time with. There are a lot of characters throughout the first book that Hadrian comes into contact with. Events happen in his life, and then those characters kind of move on, just like you would, like, walking around in your own life. You come across people who are only in your life for a short amount of time. And so you have characters like that throughout the books, but you also have these long-term characters that are people who stay in your life for good or for bad. And you obviously get to develop those relationships further throughout multiple books. And so I really appreciated being able to continue to build those relationships, but also lean back on some of the things that we learned in the first book about certain people's personalities, and then maybe how some events have changed some of the thought processes of some of the characters in the book. So I really enjoy the characters as well. And then lastly, I could talk about this book for a really long time, but I won't. Lastly, the world building in this book I think is fantastic. So I think that the first book, the world building is good as well, but I think that the first book is a little bit more grounded. And I mean that literally. Like, I think you spend, you're still in space, you're still traveling throughout the universe, but I think this book is the Howling Dark is a little bit more spacey than the first book. So I guess that could be a perk or a con depending on the reader. But I think that there's a good mix as well, but we get to be a little bit more adventurous in this book. We also get to be, we get to see the world gets bigger, or the universe gets bigger, and you get to expand upon some of the things that weren't quite clear in the first book, or that were just questions that were led to you in the first book. But yeah, I've really enjoyed the series so far, and I'm excited to start the third book. The next book that I'm going to talk to you guys about is The Blade itself. So this was a 5-star prediction of mine. Unfortunately, I gave this book 4 stars, but I still really enjoyed it. I am just waiting for this book and the storyline to start. I really loved Joe Abercrombie's character work in this book, but what kept it from getting a 5-star for me is it was a little bit too plotless, which I knew going in, so like I'm not disappointed by that. But because of that, I just felt like this book, I couldn't quite give this book a 5-star. So if you've never heard of this book, this is the first book in the First Law trilogy, and this trilogy is part of a very long series of books that is in this world. But the first trilogy is the First Law, and The Blade itself is book number 1. And we follow 5 different characters who are all in the same world and doing different things in different locations in the world. The character work that Joe Abercrombie does is amazing. You get to really get into each character's head. And so one of the characters you follow is Glokta, which if you've heard of The Blade itself, I'm sure that Glokta is one of the characters that you have heard of. He is the kingdom's torturer, and he's called an inquisitor, and he used to be the kingdom's kind of glory boy. Like he was, the face of the kingdom. He was a fencer, a really famous fencer, and he went to war for them and was this really powerful, popular figure in their culture. And you learn about him and his journey to becoming this torturer, but you get to see his perspective of being the person that he is now, and where he came from. And I really enjoyed, so this is a grimdark fantasy. I really enjoyed the darkness of Glokta's character, but also the bits of light in him, and it's just, I don't think it's a perspective I've ever read from before. I've definitely never read from a torturer's perspective, but his particular voice is really interesting to follow. And then you have my favorite character in the book, Logan, who is this kind of badass warrior who you start out with him fighting this monster in the northern lands, and his journey south afterwards. And I really enjoyed, the reason that he is my favorite character is he is this big burly, he is your typical warrior at the very beginning, but throughout the book you kind of get to know him, you get to be in his head and see the changes that he has made from the life he used to have to the life he has now. And I just love a big burly guy who is a softie at heart. And not that I'm saying he is completely soft by any means, but just some of the things that happen in Logan's character throughout the book just really make me, I just love him to death. I would die for Logan. And then something in particular, which I'm not going to spoil it because it's at the very end of the book, but something in particular happens with his character that I cannot wait to see what happens in future books. We also follow a fencer named Giselle. He was probably my least favorite character. He's very young, very arrogant. I do think his character arc is interesting to read, so I wasn't mad at the fact that I didn't like him, which is hard for me. I want to pride myself and say that I don't have to like the characters in order to like the story, which I do think is true, but it is a lot harder for me to enjoy a story if I don't enjoy a character, and I really did enjoy reading Giselle's storyline, even though I didn't like him as a character. You also follow a wizard whose name is Baez, I think is how you pronounce it, who was really fun to read about. The magic system in the world and its potential problem, which like I said, I'm not going to say anything that's going to spoil anything, but it gives you enough about the world that draws you in, which is one of the things I mentioned at the beginning. I loved getting to know all these characters, but I want to know what happens with this world. I want to know what these culminating events are. I want to know what everything is leading to, and I can't wait to figure it out, because I know, I think people have said that the plot really starts to pick up in book 2, so I can't wait to start it. I'm really excited about this. So yeah, this was a 4-star, but I have a feeling that this series is going to be a favorite. The next book that I'm going to talk to you guys about is The Shadow of the Gods. So another series, big surprise, big fantasy books. So this book is Norse mythology inspired, I believe. In this book, you follow three main perspectives. They all live within the same world, and the book builds up to some culminating events. So the storyline itself, they're all on the same timeline, but they're all in different locations leading to the same, or not the same events, but leading to some culminating events in the end of the book. So it's kind of similar to The Blade itself. The three characters are Orca, who is a mother who lives with her husband and her son, kind of off in the forest. They're very secluded from everyone. They kind of like it that way. And then the other two characters, I can't remember the woman's name, but there's a male named Varg, and then I can't remember what her name is. There's a woman, and both of them they are mercenaries, but they are mercenaries for different, let's call them gangs. So I will say that this book is also like The Blade itself, because I don't really feel, there's definitely more plot than The Blade itself, but I do feel like it is lacking in plot. And I think that that's because, and I haven't read the second book, and I also haven't heard many people talk about the series, but I'm assuming the second book is going to be where everything kind of comes together. At the end of this book, that definitely happened. We got to see some of the payoff of some of our journeys with each of the characters, and where each of the characters was headed and what specifically happens. I do think that this world is really interesting. And I think that in this book, so if I'm comparing The Blade itself to The Shadow of the Gods, I think that this book does more world building than The Blade itself does. I think The Blade itself has a lot more questions that we're still trying to have answered by the end of book one, whereas I think The Shadow of the Gods, you get a lot of the answers in the end of this book. Like all of the kind of the breadcrumbs come together. Now, I do still think that both books end in a place where you want to see where the story goes, and you know that there's going to be bigger, broader events that are happening because of what happened in book one. So I think they're similar in that way. But I do think that more world building goes on. You figure out more about the world that they're in The Shadow of the Gods. And I think that the world was really fun to learn about. Some of the creatures, and I don't even know what to call them, humanoids, they definitely can talk, but they're definitely not human. In the world were really interesting to learn about and get to see. Also the magic, the explanation and exploration of the Tainted Ones was really interesting, and I want to know more, which the book did its job. It makes me want to read the second one. I do think that this book was harder for me to read than The Blade itself, because this book is very dense fantasy. I think The Blade itself, while I do think that it's going to be, an epic fantasy book, I think that, I don't even know how to describe it. The Shadow of the Gods is just much more serious. There's a undertone throughout the entire book of seriousness and intense, like it's just intense the entire time. Even if you're in an event that's not super important, the book just feels like gripping the entire time, and every single thing that you're doing is something that's important and going to lead to something else. And so it was a little bit more exhaustive to read, because I did feel like I had to pay attention to little details, and there was so much about the world that you had to know. And I think that that's in a good way, but I do think that it's interesting, and I didn't even think about it before I started this video, but comparing The Blade itself to The Shadow of the Gods, I do think that they're very similar, but they're very different as well. So I really enjoyed this series, and I do plan to continue. And the last book that I want to talk to you guys about today is The Discord of Gods. So I told you guys that I am planning on, or one of my goals is to complete as many series as I start. And as you've noticed on this list, I've started several series. This is a finished series for me. I have finished all 5 books in the Is this called the Chorus of Dragons series? I'll put it up on the screen if that's not it, but I'm pretty sure it's the Chorus of Dragons series. So because of the fact that this is the culminating book, I can't tell you guys much about it. I will tell you about the first book, which was The Ruin of Kings. And The Ruin of Kings, you follow Kieran. So each book, I will say, follows... They don't all follow different characters, but you might follow Kieran in the first book and then someone else in the second book, or a different group of people would be like the main cast of characters for the different books. But all 5 books center around a main cast of characters. So the first book, you really focus on Kieran. You start the book with Kieran in jail with his imprisoner, whose name is Talon, and these books are all written in such a way that it is someone telling you the story of what's happened. So the story of what's happened has been chronicled by someone and you are reading it. And as you're reading it, there is someone who is making footnotes within the storyline of things that they agree with, things that they would change, and you're not quite sure why or who this person is at first. Throughout the series, you do figure it out, which I think just makes it even better. So this first series, what they do is Talon, who is the imprisoner, and Kieran are sitting in a jail cell, and they're passing this rock back and forth. And this rock actually has the ability to record the words that you are saying. So when you're holding the rock, it's recording, and then when you pass the rock off, it records the person who's holding it. And you learn at the very beginning of the book that the capital city has burned, and that Kieran is responsible, which is why he is in a jail cell. And you follow the events that led to this. And man, this series gets massive. This series is told from multiple perspectives, so you do kind of trade off. The first book and some of the other books, but not all of them, are told in disconnected timelines, and so the first book specifically goes back and forth between a future timeline and a past timeline until they connect. And some of the other books have something similar happening, but some of them don't. And this series, I mean, it has dragons, it has a world that has multiple races, you have like a noble class that you're dealing with, you also have different locations, different cities, and different countries. There's one country who... well, I don't want to describe too much. Anyway, it's just massive. The world building is amazing. The magic system that is introduced is really fun. So yeah, I just think this book, the end of the series, I do think did the rest of the books justice. This is a 4-star series for me, so not quite 5-star, but I did really enjoy my time within this series, and I think that how everything was wrapped up was really good. And I think that the amount of character development that you have from the first book to the last book, the relationships that you get to see build, and then the little tidbits that you get about some characters that aren't necessarily main characters, but that you've learned about along the way. You get to see even where their storyline ends up. In this last book, which this is a mild spoiler, I'll put that up there, and it's not really giving away anything about the plot. I just want to preface, like, there are actual dragons in this book, and the battles with the dragons are fantastic. I love the descriptions of each of the different dragons. It's amazing. This is one of the stories that I do find really hard to describe because there's just so much going on in this massive story, and because of the fact that I am on the 5th, I don't want to give too much away or any away, because I would really like you guys to be able to enjoy it. This is another book that has a glossary in the back and some details about the different cities that you learn about throughout the books and what their laws are, the journey that you take with these characters to learn about how the world works together and how all these different races live in the same world, and how they differ, but also how they are similar is just fascinating to read about, and I really enjoyed it. If you haven't picked up the Chorus of Dragons and this sounds like something that you would enjoy, please do. It's worth a read. So that is the list of the Chonky books that I have read thus far this year. So this will be 10 books that I've read throughout January and February that are, you know, above 500 pages. I do plan to continue this. Hopefully, you know, fingers crossed, maybe I can do 10 books every 2 months. I'm not sure, but I definitely have some Chonky books on my TBR for the future, and so I will be checking back in with you guys. I have had, obviously, out of this whole list of 10 that I gave you guys, I only had 2 books that were under a 4-star, and so I do really think that I have a preference for big stories. I like books that allow you to have time with your characters and time within the world. I think that that's just something my heart loves. And so I'm going to continue reading big books. If you guys have any recommendations for me, please leave them in the comments down below. I would love to hear them. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.